I came across this movie, Snowcake, where Sigourney Weaver plays an autistic woman. I'm sure it's a sweet story, but I felt a bit strange watching this portrayal of an autistic woman because it was so stereotypical, similar to Rain Man.
I gave your daughter a lift. I'm so sorry.
Okay. It must be so awful losing a child. I didn't lose her, she's dead.
Linda.
It's perfectly all right. I know all about autism. I've seen that film. She's very verbal.
I had noticed.
And go to sleep. And if you try and touch me, I'll shoot you.
Don't you?
You're a very selfish man.
No, I'm not. You're just unreasonable.
I'm autistic.
It's the same thing.
I think I get pleasure from objects rather than people. People aren't there at all. They don't turn me on one iota. I don't find people at all attractive that way. When I was sort of at school, people at school would talk about sex and I couldn't really understand what the big deal was. To me, it was just sort of nature. It's just, biology rather than anything else.
I did not know Rose Blackburn before, and I listened into that interview, which was very interesting to hear her perspective, and she is really articulating it so well. However, we still differ in so many ways, which again makes it so obvious that you can't generalize autism. We are all still individuals with different expressions of autism.
I do get lonely. I get desperately lonely. But I find it quite hard to turn to people to satisfy that loneliness. I don't like people because they're unpredictable in many ways. They create change. They basically put me out of control in many ways. You just have to walk down the street and somebody is changing something, painting a front door or knocking down a building, something like that. It's people causing those changes. And so quite often I view people as causing me a lot of distress that I wouldn't otherwise have to live through. And there are so many things I cannot do because I'm autistic. I'm basically physically disabled because I'm autistic. I find the big bad world's incomprehensible at times. People just doing extraordinary things that I just can't understand, because a lot of what they're doing is non-verbal communication. They're implying things, and I don't understand that, so I just see strange actions that don't all add up, and I just can't cope with it, and I just think, forget it.
Roz does cope because of her parents' early training. She regularly runs the gauntlet of the outside world to earn a living as a speaker, describing what it's like to be Roz. In front of a group of healthcare workers, she's at ease about being herself. But to get to the venue, she has to pretend to be someone else.
I do have to make a great effort and go out and present this normal image. And sometimes I just think, it's too much. Why don't I just dump speech and forget it and go back to making grunty noises and gestures and things, which are much easier to me? I guess it is natural, it is normal, it's what I am like. I am autistic.
I am very different in that regard. I love silence, and even by myself. I enjoy that peaceful silence so much I don't even want to make any noise myself. So if I'm not recording videos, I don't make any noises and do not talk. And this is very recharging for me. So silence to me is a form of stimming. Maybe it's because I grew up having my parents always argue, or my dad always talking and never just enjoying the silence. And therefore noise in any form is stressful to my system. And also grunting or talking or screeching or screaming, whatever. Since I have misophonia as well as hyperacusis, noise is torture to me, and therefore silence is what I prefer. And for many autistics anyway, speech doesn't come natural. That is true. Because very often our Broca's area is impaired, and therefore many of us prefer to write instead of talking. But then there are also other autistics that are extremely verbal and very, very articulate. So, yeah, it really depends on the person. So, my upbringing was really very strict, and my dad kind of was terrified that I was not normal. So once I just played around with my saliva and then it just dropped out of my mouth. It was silly, just what kids do. Nothing severe. But my dad, he completely made a big thing out of it and said, "Oh, did that happen to you or did you do it on purpose?" And he was really scared. And somehow this caused so much shame in me. And I never did that again. Never, ever. And I very much tried to behave and not pull any negative attention to myself, which was difficult because my dad basically watched me all the time. Like really all the time when he was around. Yeah, and then you kind of freeze and you don't dare to be yourself. So I never learned to be silly, and I try to be really as normal as possible, whatever that is. And therefore I don't make any noises or whatever. If I'm angry or stressed, I start to cuss and swear. But as a kid, I used to be very, very silent. I never said anything. And only in recent years, as I was all by myself, nobody watching me, sometimes talk to myself or talk to the screen or laugh out loud, things like that. But I'm still not really silly in that regard. And I think a lot of that was because I was shamed into behaving normal. And also when I see others. So this is Sigourney Weaver as an autistic, and she did her research, definitely, but when I look at it, I cannot relate to it, because that's so not me.
Carrie, you only have to be the face of anyone at least once a week. You know, that's the rules.
How are your children?
I don't have any children. Okay, now, go on the green spot. Come on, let's go. Okay, and do some greetings. Okay, here we go.
Yeah.
Gosh, I would hate that.
Hello?
I would
My
never
name
do
is
that.
Linda. Welcome to Value Mart. I'll be your greeter today.
Hello. Get your coat.
What?
I've only just heard, Linda. What are you doing at work?
I'm being the greeter.
No, I mean, what are you doing at work today? So sorry. But Vivian, why didn't you say something to somebody?
I think you need to take a few days off, okay?
Why? What have I done?
Just take as many as you need. How many is that?
3, 4, 5.
Do I still get paid?
Of course.
5?
Yeah, and if there's anything I can do.
I really don't like being the greeter.
Goodbye. You nearly ready?
I'm ready.
I hope you've dressed up.
I dressed up.
So I would never do that in public. If I would have behaved like that in public, my dad would have screamed at me.
I always sit at this table. What's that?
I actually hate clowns. They freak me out. If you know that scene in Bones where Seely Booth shoots at a clown, I would do the same if I had a weapon. I can't stand clowns. Really not. Ugh.
Idea for yours?
It's Ronald McDonald. Who's that?
It's Ronald McDonald. What do you want?
The usual. Please.
Which is?
Small fries times 4, separate bags, and a fresh orange 3 straws.
This reminds me of the stereotypical Rain Man. Autistic. And in movies, it's always portrayed like this. I don't know why. Probably because you wouldn't see any difference. But I mean, I have watched this movie back when it came out, and I would have never guessed that I was autistic. Really not. Because I couldn't relate. And then there is another movie with Shah Rukh Khan, and he plays an autistic that is afraid of the color yellow. So back then I was into Bollywood movies for some time, and the movie has a nice story behind it. It still shows the good of somebody who has autism and wanting justice. So it's kind of a good story. It's a bit, I mean, Bollywood is Bollywood. So here it says a mild form of autism, Asperger's syndrome. Anyway.
बस यही एक फर्क है इंसानों में और कोई नहीं।
मेरा नाम मिज़वान खान है। खान हो सकता है आप लोगों को मैं थोड़ा सा अलग लगूं, इसका ये मतलब नहीं कि मैं पागल हूँ, मैं बहुत इंटेलिजेंट हूँ। कोई नहीं बता पाया कि मेरे ऐसे होने की वजह क्या है, लेकिन तुम्हें ये जानने की जरूरत भी नहीं पड़ी। मैंने अम्मी को दिया वादा पूरा कर लिया, अपने लिए एक खुशहाल जिंदगी बना ली मैंने।
This is why it is a Bollywood film, dramatic, emotional.
My name is Khan, and I'm not a terrorist.
And he repeats that he is Asperger's and very intelligent. And when I watched that movie, I also could not relate. I had no idea what that was supposed to be. Asperger's, no idea. On the other hand, I knew I was different. But I always thought, okay, I'm just introverted and shy. But it took me such a long time to understand that there actually was a different form of autism that was way less pronounced. What is very puzzling to me is those 3 levels of autism. Because even level 1, when you compare those, there are so big differences. They specifically indicate how much support an autistic person needs, with level 1 meaning relatively little support is required, and level 3 indicating the need for a great deal of support. Because it depends. Everybody says that. In the autistic community, it depends on the environment. You can be fully functional in one environment and fully dysfunctional in another environment, and you are still the same person. So you might need more support in one environment and no support in another environment, regardless of being level 1 or not. Thanks to detailed accounts of Jean-Jacques Gaspard Itard, we learn the fascinating history of a boy who was found in a forest in France. The boy was first seen in 1797 in the woods near Lacouen. The villagers caught him twice in 1797 and 1798, but the boy managed to escape. He was captured again in early 1800, and this time was held, probably against his will. The boy, thought to be about 12 years old, was examined and labeled as idiot, imbécile. Itard, a young physician at the time, took on the challenge of studying Victor's condition and rehabilitating him. Based on Itard's report on the boy's descriptions and reactions to intervention and other papers written about him, it has been suggested that Victor might have had autism. As Victor never acquired speech, just a few words to ask for food, and maintained his autistic behavior that could not be much improved despite systematic education, he would have been described today as low functioning. The question is, how could a low functioning autistic boy survive alone for at least 2 years in the wild and could not live independently in a society among people? Did social rules and conventions disable him? Are high-functioning people with autism disabled by society? Concept of disability is relative to a particular environment, both cultural and biological. If environmental expectations change, or they are put in a different environment, people with high-functioning autism may not necessarily be seen as disabled. In the present society, to be successful means to be able to socialize and talk sweetly. Many employers, especially in non-industrial and non-technological fields, prefer sweet-talking, polite, politically correct employees. They might not be very clever, but pleasant in company. As such, institutions do not deal with rocket science. It does not matter if the employees are incompetent in their field. It is more important that they comply with social rules. In this context, people with high-functioning autism have no chance to succeed. They may be capable and inventive, but still they will be socially disabled and hence unemployed in the field of their own expertise. And about recovery from autism, there have been reported cases of full recovery from autism following different treatments. How can we account for many adults who are diagnosed only in their 30s or 40s and who have been indistinguishable from their peers and did not know they were autistic before the diagnosis. As they were born with ASD but not diagnosed, they did not think they were autistic. They discovered their condition only late in life, and the diagnosis helps them understand the invisible to others difficulties they have experienced. Yeah, exactly. And I wish I would have been diagnosed way earlier and gotten the support I would have needed. And maybe things would have turned out a bit differently. And now, at age 47, I still struggle to find my place and my purpose. So, people like Temple Grandin, she is still very much autistic despite everything. So this myth about autism recovery, it should stop. I think it's just a business. Temple Grandin says, you get older, you get more experience, and then of course you learn to adapt. With more experience, you also don't get so scared anymore like you did as a child when everything was new to you. So of course you might seem to be less autistic, but that's just an illusion. You still struggle with stuff that neurotypicals do not. So there will be always that difference, regardless how much you learn to camouflage and adapt. So I think this is more the stereotypical type of autism, and I'm just not like that. What can I say? So Sigourney Weaver has talked with autistics and observed them, and that's what she picked up. And as Sarah Hendricks said, there are those two types, the stereotypical type, and then there is the other type.
I would just like to say that I think your caregivers do a marvelous job. No, they can't pay you enough.
Actually, she's my wife.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's a good answer.
I'm loving it.
Doing silly things, I feel this shame coming up, and I feel very uncomfortable. And I think this is some kind of a PTSD reaction, which is called emotional flashback. Specifically, a past emotional state is triggered by present-day events. We typically talk about emotional flashbacks in the context of trauma recovery. With time and effort, we can absolutely get better at coping with emotional flashbacks and creating more positive memories today. But the first step is identifying it. feel very much ashamed if I fall apart in public, if I cry in public, or if I start to tremble out of stress when somebody comes too close, like the 2 policemen in the train that wanted to see my mask exemption, and they came really, really close, you know. And that probably reminds me of my dad coming too close and being a threat and really inflicting violence on me. So I'm triggered very quickly, and then my body just starts trembling, which actually is a typical stress response. Shaking and tremors. When your body is subjected to stress, it goes into fight or flight mode. Stress hormones flood your body and speed up your heart rate, blood pressure, and your breathing. Your body prepares to deal with the stressor, interpreting the anxiousness as a signal that you'll need to stand your ground or escape from danger. Your muscles become primed to act, leading to a trembling sensation, twitching or shaking. Tremors caused by anxiety are called psychogenic tremors. There you have it. Feelings of anxiety can trigger other symptoms such as muscle tension, difficulty concentrating, increased heart rate, uncontrollable shaking or trembling. Tremors caused by anxiety aren't dangerous, but they can be uncomfortable. Sometimes losing control of your body when you're having anxiety can quickly escalate into other symptoms. And I also have these. This is usually after that stressor. When I have calmed down again, it can lead to feeling exhausted, and muscles may actually feel painful, and I can have a headache or migraine right after that, at the same day or the next day. And during the trembling, when I feel stressed, I also start sweating and feeling hot, really hot. And sometimes it's even itching in my armpits, itching on my arms and legs. And of course, feeling tense, irritable, and on edge. After that, too. So for me, the best thing to calm down is to get myself out of the situation, into solitude and space, away from people. Fresh air is good too. That's the first thing. And talking about it can help, sharing it with others or people I feel safe with. Yeah, and then of course you have those kind of therapies like EMDR or neurofeedback or somatic experience that work with the brain and nervous system. And this is the best approach, I would say, especially somatic experience when I need to calm down from rage and feeling extremely stressed, I can do this exercise. Push into a wall, release, push, release, and that's called titration. And you give all into it, and that can really help you to release this tension and this anger you feel in yourself. Or you can also grab a towel, or I do it with sheepskin. I grab into it and then I release. Again, the same. Grabbing, releasing. And you can even make some sounds like hissing or grunting, and really get it off your chest, get it out of your system, that anger, that tension. And this will really help to calm down from this sympathetic arousal back into your window of tolerance. And then long term, to be more resilient to stress, of course, it is always good to have this therapy with somebody who does EMDR or neurofeedback or somatic experience. To do it with a person who is very experienced and who is present and will have the capacity to hold the space and be there with you and support you in this process. And of course, not all autistics are the same. For me, I like to work with people when I feel safe with them. I sure also need solitude, but for me it is also calming to know that there is somebody who actually has my back. It is still very rare to find a therapist that knows about autism as well as PTSD and has a nervous system based approach rather than cognitive behavioral approach. It's really rare to find that, at least here in Switzerland. And I hope that research will be catching up. Those who have autism live in a world that creates high levels of stress and anxiety for them. They feel confused and overwhelmed by social and sensory experiences and have considerable difficulty assessing, regulating, and communicating their emotions. Their developmental history may also include being rejected and abused by peers since early childhood, leading to a sense of loneliness and depression. In the adult years, the person may be greatly stressed by not obtaining the academic, relationship, and employment success that might have been expected, considering their intellectual abilities. And often there is a continuation of experiences that are perceived as traumatizing. The high levels of stress and anxiety can make the person overly sensitive and reactive to aversive events, causing hypervigilance low resilience, and an amplification of the depth of emotional response. The level of emotional trauma and stress due to specific and often repeated experiences can lead to the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. In my extensive clinical experience, I have seen many children, adolescents, and adults to all levels of expression of autism with an additional diagnosis of PTSD. There you have it. And here in Switzerland, they still need to catch up on the PTSD. Somehow, it's so difficult to get diagnosed with PTSD. I don't know why. They are so behind in this. Even though if you tell them your repeated and different kinds of traumas, they just ignore it. It's not relevant to them. They don't care. But to this day, I still say, when a psychiatrist or psychologist says they are experts on autism, they need to have also some expertise in trauma and PTSD. Clinicians need to review a person's developmental history and current circumstances in order to screen for PTSD and recognize that some behaviors that appear to be almost random may be PTSD flashbacks and panic attacks. PTSD will also increase the signs of expression of autism, thus having a negative impact on social engagement and reciprocity, and the ability to read someone's intentions. And there may be an accentuation of the need to maintain sameness for safety. There you have it. Heightened sensory sensitivity and an increased desire to pursue interests to act as a thought blocker. The origins of PTSD can be due to experiences at home and school, as well as those in government institutions, such as psychiatric wards or prisons even. The key factor is the person's perception of a given event and subsequent trauma. And just to say, you don't have a choice how you feel about something. Your nervous system will see it as a threat or not. And if you have experienced developmental trauma as a child already, you might be primed for more trauma because your nervous system is already dysregulated. So your window of tolerance is narrower than for a person who did not experience the same amount of trauma as you did, or had more support, or whatever. And for autistics, already the workplace can be traumatic. Added to this is the autistic characteristic of having difficulty determining whether an action was in fact malicious or accidental. That's a bit gaslighting, because it's the nervous system that will react. And as I say, autistics have some kind of sixth sense. So you feel if a person means well or not, and usually it's rather the opposite, at least in my case. I believe in the good of people, and for a very long time I tend to not acknowledge that this person doesn't mean well. So it's rather the opposite. I will wait too long and stay in a relationship that is abusive because I still see the good in a person. And only later I realize I was traumatized. Tony Edward writes, "In my conversations with those who have autism, I frequently identify themes of trust and safety, social disconnection, and a pervasive pessimism that their lives will always include traumatic experiences. They also identify a lack of literature on autism and PTSD. I agree. As I read the manuscript for Living with PTSD on the Autism Spectrum, Insightful Analysis with Practical Applications, I felt that, at last, we have a resource that will not only facilitate understanding from a personal and professional perspective, but also change lives and lead to the effective treatment of PTSD in someone who has autism."